Can I first of all introduce Janetta Otterbury, who is the publisher of Otterbury Books and had the foresight to publish this book.
Well, hello everybody. Thank you all for coming. We're so excited to be publishing and launching The Boy Lost in the Maze this evening with you today. It's an extraordinarily rich and beautiful YA verse novel, and it's an incredible follow-up to The Girl Who Became a Tree, which you're seeing here, one of the very first paperback copies, which I think Joe hasn't even seen before yet, that we'll be publishing in November. So watch out for that as well. So The Boy Lost in the Maze, it's already been chosen as a Times Book of the Week, Blackwell's Book of the Month, School Reading List Book of the Month, and rave reviews are beginning to pour in thick and fast. And we obviously have high hopes of being shortlisted for the major awards with this book. We see it as an incredibly important development for Joe and for us. We publishers like saying things like by an author at the height of his powers, but actually Joseph really is worthy of that accolade. And yet, who knows where his writing will take him next? He undoubtedly is one of the most exciting and original poets and authors working today, and got an exciting journey ahead, Joe. I also want to just publicly express my personal congratulations for being the new Children's Laureate. Can't wait to be with you on that journey over the next 2 years. So, you know, thank you for entrusting your poetry to Otterbury Books. We're immensely proud to be a small publisher that publishes your work and to be a part of your journey onwards. I also want to just welcome Kate Millner, who's here tonight, the illustrator of all 3 of Joe's poetry books for Otterbury Books, including the earlier one, Overheard in a Tower Block. I think her sensitivity to Joe's poetic voice is astounding, and she really does truly bring a new dimension to the work through her illustration. We're going to be hearing from Kate later on. Thank you as ever to the Otterbury team. And tonight, I particularly want to thank Tatty de Jersey, who's worked so hard with Joe and Book Trust and Midas for the Laureate and for this book. And I want to mention also a person that a lot of you will know, Nikki Potter, a long-time publicist for Otterbury and for Joe, who worked closely with Joe right from the start. I'm going to hold a book from another publisher here, from his very first book with Francis Lincoln that was published all those years ago in 2014. So Nikki has been hugely instrumental in bringing Joe to notice in the children's world. So handing over now to Nikki Gamble, our wonderful and brilliant host for this evening, and so looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janetta. And 2014 was it? Werewolf Club. So that's quite a stellar rise in 8 years, actually, when you think of all the things that Joe has achieved in that time. So let me tell you a little bit, everybody, about how this evening is going to run, because we thought that more than anything, you would like to hear extracts from this book and to hear Joe reading his poetry. So we have chosen 6 poems from the book, and Joe will be reading those, and that will be interspersed with some conversation. You are going to have the opportunity to see some of Kate's illustrations and to hear her talk about how she approached this particular book. And then there will be an opportunity for audience questions at the end. Again, because there are so many of you this evening, we would ask that you pose your questions via the chat, and we'll take them there just for speed so that we can get through as many as possible in the hour that we've got together. So let's welcome Joe. Thank you, Joseph Coelho, for joining us. And before we dig into the book, The Boy Lost in the Maze, I also wanted to add my congratulations about the Laureate and to ask you what it's been like so far.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you Janetta, and it's so lovely to be here. Thank you to everyone who's logged on. It's lovely to virtually see you all. The laureateship's been wonderful. Over summer, it was a bit calmer because, you know, school holidays and all that, but there was a lot of media stuff. Now I'm finding it's all the media stuff plus all the events. So I'm on my 15th day of being on the road. So I'm getting a little bit tired, but I'm loving it. It's been great just traveling all over and meeting readers and meeting families and young people and going back into schools.
You always seem so energized. You never look tired. And I know you're in Cheltenham ready for the Cheltenham Festival tomorrow. Just one more question about the laureate. I know that you recently met with Jason Reynolds, and he's the outgoing US Children's Laureate. I wonder if he shared any tips with you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I said to Jason, it was completely lovely. We got to spend the best part of a day together. And I said, you know, so how's it been? Like, what tips do you have? And he gave brilliant advice. He said, burn out, which I thought was fantastic, because it is a once in a lifetime opportunity and I want to do the best job I can. And I don't want to finish my tenure and think, oh, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd done that. So I plan on healthily burning out, you know, and getting through to the other end and then having a very long holiday.
And what's your mission for your 2 years?
I'm focusing on 3 areas. So the first is the poetry prompts, which went live today. So from today, there's a video going live every week, and they are 5 to 10 minute long invitations to get the nation writing a poem. I want to get rid of this baggage that poetry has of being very difficult and complex. I just want everyone to discover themselves as a poet. So the videos will now come out every Monday. So there'll be one next Monday and the Monday after, and every Monday for the whole of my tenure as laureate. And I hope people start sharing those poems as well. I'll also be joining about 70 odd libraries to complete my library marathon, which some people may remember I started pre-COVID. I joined 140 libraries, just joined my 141st. So I'll be joining the rest of those libraries and reading stories and poems whilst I'm there and meeting librarians and celebrating these wonderful spaces. And last but not least, I'll be highlighting up and coming writers, illustrators, poets, editors, agents. I want to make sure every young person gets to see themselves represented in the book industry so that they can all have that moment of, that could be me, that job could be me. That's what I hope to achieve over next.
Big goals. You can do it. I commit to doing your poetry prompts. So there we go.
Oh, thank you.
So we're going to talk about The Boy Lost in the Maze. It's a novel like the previous one, The Girl Who Became a Tree, a novel told in poems. And you use that very specifically as a strapline on the first book. Do you see this as a novel told in poems or a verse novel? And what's the difference?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like I love verse novels, and I feel like what they do so brilliantly is use free and open verse to sort of grab the reader by the hand and lead them, you know, at 100 miles an hour through a story. And that's what I think they're so brilliant at. What I was really interested in, which sort of started with Overheard in a Tower Block, was using individual poems and a mix of free verse and form poems to tell a story. So I started to play with that in Overheard in a Tower Block, went a step further in The Girl Who Became a Tree, and in The Boy Lost in the Maze, I have taken it further still. So there's more free-flowing verse, but also I wanted to keep a handle on those form poems. So there's pantoums and ballads and other forms kind of represented, because I love the idea of a novel that you can sit with the poems and you can even return to it and flip through and pick out poems and enjoy those poems as individual poems, as well as being a novel. So that's what I've been playing with, and that's why the strapline isn't on The Boy Lost in the Maze, because I feel like it goes a little bit further towards the verse novel end. Interesting.
I think we'll probably get there in a little bit more depth as we go through, because they are themes that you pick up in this book very explicitly as well, about free verse and form. But I think we should know a little bit about what's it about. So I'm going to ask you to tell us about it in your words.
Okay, so The Boy Lost in the Maze is the story of Theo, who's taking his A-levels. He's a young Londoner, and he's just done his mock exams, and he's finding out in English about the 6 labours of Theseus. He's only come across Theseus and the Minotaur before, and is shocked to discover that Theseus, like him, was also brought up by a single parent and had to go on a long journey around the Saronic Gulf, defeating monsters, bandits, and thieves in order to get to his father, King Aegeus, over in Athens. Whilst he's discovering this, he decides that he wants to see his dad. He knows where his dad lives. He hasn't seen him for about 7 years. He remembers where he lives. He knocks on the door, and his dad reveals that he is not his father. And so Theo's journey begins, searching for his biological father. And then these 2 narratives start to intertwine, that of Theseus and that of Theo, as well as the story of the Minotaur, which is also kind of drip fed into the narrative.
There are quite a number of voices in this novel, those 3 that you mentioned there. And of course, it opens in true classical tradition with an oracle. And the oracle describes this story as 2 boys hoping to be men, 2 boys severed from their fathers, 2 boys searching a maze of manhood. That idea of severing and the violence that it kind of brings to mind, and the maze and the Minotaur being brought up there for us in the oracle as well. So it's a juxtaposition of the epic and the personal. Theo, as you say, has this fascination with Theseus, and I wondered whether that in any way mirrored your own interest. Where did that begin for you?
Well, I've always had an interest in the Greek myths and fairy tales, which started when I was at uni studying archaeology. After university, I was commissioned to write a play based on the Oresteia. So that as well really sparked off a love for the Greek myths. What I like about using myth and fairy tale is that there are very few stories that we have nowadays, certainly less stories than in the ancient past, that everyone knows. If you think back to ancient Greece, because we can all remember. If we think back to what times must have been like in ancient Greece, there would have been a ton of stories that lots of people knew. And what's great about that is that you can subvert those stories, you can surprise the audience. I feel like we're getting less and less of those stories now as we start to lose touch with all traditions, and stories don't get passed on. And plus, we have so much competition for our attention, and there is so much content. We don't even watch films a second time now. We rarely read books a second time, and I feel that's such a shame. But I want to hold on to these myths that we do have, and I always knew about Theseus and the Minotaur, but I didn't know about the 6 labours of Theseus, and how that immediately preceded him meeting his father and then going on to slaughter the Minotaur.
Do you know, maybe it's time for the first poem, otherwise we'll be chatting for the hour. We need to hear some poetry.
This poem's called Theseus Killed Them, and this comes at a point in the story when Theo is finding out about the myth of the 6 labours of Theseus, and just putting into his own words his understanding of how that myth works. Theseus killed them. "Your father is a king," said his mother. "Just lift this heavy rock. He left some things for you to prove your kingly stock." Beneath the rock he found sandals and a sword. Sandals for a journey, a sword for the criminal hordes. Theseus walked his father's road, but the way was filled with tests. He had to battle 6 enemies and prove he was the best. The first was Periphetes, who was a little dim. Theseus took his bronze club. Theseus killed him. The second was Sinis, who killed with a bent tree limb. He ripped his victims in 2. Theseus killed him. The third was a pig who'd been causing quite a stir. She was the Crominian sow. Theseus killed her. The fourth was named Scion, who gave his victims a surprise swim. He'd feed them to a monster turtle. Theseus killed him. The fifth was Cercymon, a king who wrestled for a win. He'd wrestle strangers to death. Theseus killed him. The sixth was innkeeper Procrustes, who liked everything to be trim, forcing guests to fit his bed. Theseus killed him. When the killing journey was done, Theseus found his father's kingdom grim, the young yearly killed by the Minotaur. So Theseus killed him.
It has to be said, there are some pretty gruesome deaths in this book.
Yeah.
It's not one for your younger readers, is it?
No, definitely 14 plus.
So I'm really interested because it's this these labours against these malefactors, as legend or myth would have them be. Maybe not so in your book, but we can think about that. That kind of gives this novel its structure. And I wondered how the interweaving of Theo's story and Theseus' story came together. Did you have to work from the myth and then pull Theo's story in, or was it just a little bit more organic than that?
It was actually quite organic. I was quite surprised with how organic and how easy it was. To a certain extent, I'm drawing on my own experience here of searching for my own father at the age of 19, and that was a search, and there was a cast of characters that I ended up meeting. So it became quite easy to sort of kind of superimpose the myth, the 6 labors of Theseus, on top of that, and kind of add the fictional elements, and then start to blend myth and magic into reality. I had lots of moments of, oh my gosh, that matches up with that, and if I change this and make that, it just kind of flowed. And I do sort of believe with writing, it is kind of connecting to something other than yourself, and that kind of cliche of listening to the characters, but you end up discovering something which works.
It's interesting because it is so beautifully, when people get the chance to read this, if they haven't read it already, it's so beautifully interwoven that it's impossible really to see which came first, if you like. And as you're saying, it seems to have come together there. I think it's the Oracle that says these two young men are parted by myth and parted by reality. But by the end of reading the book, I really felt that they were connected by myth and connected by reality. I wonder whether you see it like that or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been keeping a 5-year diary. I'm on my second 5-year diary. And when I first started writing in the diary, after the first 2 or 3 years, you start to notice things coming round again, like to the day, and it's really eerie and slightly unnerving. It'll be random things. It might be meeting a person and seeing the same person again, or the same sort of feelings or the same sort of situation arising on a particular date. But it doesn't happen regularly. But you get a suggestion that there is something going on in this thing we call life. There is some hidden structure to the universe. And I've always been really interested in that, and how history tends to repeat itself. And I see that as a spiral, that we either travel up or travel down. And I think the hope is to travel up, and like the same sorts of things come around, but in a kind of better light each time. And I sort of see this story as that continuum of these 2 boys. But are they even 2 boys? Is it they're almost like they're twin souls, or the same soul working out the same things throughout time, which I like to think we all do. If we get a bit spiritual, kind of reincarnation and things coming around again, I like to think that maybe we get a chance to work out our issues again and again until we reach some sort of enlightenment.
Has to be said, just while you mention that Kate's illustration, which is on the contents page, and I know it's one that you particularly like, of Theo and Theseus, kind of reflects that idea that you're talking about. And they're almost the beginning of a spiral there. Also felt a little bit like a drama or dance pose where you have to trust in somebody else.
I thought all of Kate's illustrations are just so perfect, but that one in particular spoke to me because straight out of uni I was heavily involved with physical theatre, working with companies like Gecko, and going on stage and doing lots of contact improvisation and stuff, and it took me straight back to that, and the connections that you form, and and how it is about creating a bond and having a relationship on stage which reflects something bigger. And I feel like that image in particular does that. These two boys are connected, and there is trust and there is support within that brilliant pose of, you know, complete giving in, one giving in to the other but being supported by the other. I think it's perfect.
Well, we don't have to, but we want to move on and hear another poem.
Brilliant, thank you. So Theseus found out his father was not his father when his mum told him to lift up a big heavy stone, and there underneath that stone was a sword and sandals that his father, King Aegeus, had left for him. Theo, in modern day London, has his own stone. This poem is called There Is a Stone in My Chest, and Theo was walking home with his friend Mark after school. Mark and I mapped the future on a rainy walk home after school. He wants to be a journalist. His dad will teach him how to drive. He's already picked his universities. His parents will be at the open days. His dad lets him sip raindrops of whiskey on sleepless nights. His dad tells him how to talk to girls, how to be respectful, how to listen like leaves listen to morning dew. My mum tells me, you don't have to go to university. No one in our family has. You'll drown. My mum says, splash your home onto the council housing list. My mum says, not another drab parents' evening. I'm not going again. Dad would want me to go. On his hailstone visits, he'd complain to mum, why can't this boy read? Because no one taught me how. There is a stone in my chest when I think of my father, a stone I cannot lift, a stone that settles its weight when I visit the barbers alone. When my body blooms, there is a stone in my chest that I cannot lift.
Takes us straight to the heart of Theo's real labour that he's got there, and the whole image of the stone, you know, it conjures up perhaps the labours that Theseus is going through. You know, Theo's got this big labour. I suppose a question that arose for me is whether the search for the father is as much a search for himself as it is for a missing parent. There's a poem later where it says, my ability to know myself left to hang out like a mote of dust. And there's lots of looking in the mirror, wondering which parts are like him. I just wondered how much of it is trying to find yourself rather than just trying to find the father.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think we probably put a lot of pressure on our parents, don't we? And we assume that they make us the people that we are. And so when there is a parent absent, when there's that space, there is that constant questioning of, oh, who am I supposed to be? And so I was really interested in exploring that, and especially exploring that in the context of masculinity. You know, if you as a boy have that male role model missing, then where do you go to? Where do you look for those role models? Where can you find that? But it is as much about finding yourself and peace within yourself and finding acceptance of yourself as you are, and realizing that you don't need this societal idea of, oh, I need a man to show me how to be a man, or I need a parent to tell me what to be. We're all our own people, and we can take wonderful things and sometimes negative things from those that happen to bring us up, but ultimately we enter this world alone and we leave it alone.
There's a male adult in this narrative, the teacher, and of course I love the way that you portrayed the teacher in me loved the way you portrayed the teacher. At one point, of course, Theo shouts, you're not my father, but in a sense he does have father-like qualities.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun to write, and it was really interesting to kind of play with the idea of Theo assigning a kind of unconsciously assigning a father role model onto that teacher. And so at that moment when he's saying you're not my dad, it's actually him realizing and being frustrated at the fact that this wonderful teacher is not his father, who has never said that he is his father, but obviously Theo has placed all of this kind of responsibility on him. And I think we all do that to certain extents, you know, that sort of misplaced responsibility either put on friends or family members. I think it can be quite a common thing where we expect too much from people at times. I think that can happen a lot in friendships. So, you know, especially if there's been problems within the family and, you know, there are relationship breakdowns with siblings or parents or what have you, then friends can become that filler, and that can often be quite unfair.
I feel like I'm oh yes, sorry, I just wanted to, so that everybody can hear these lovely words. I'm not saying where it comes in the story, but there's a point where Mr. Addo, the teacher, is listening to Theo, and it says, listens like the light, listens to darkness, listens like the sea, listens to the shore, listens like mountains, listen to the snow. And for me, that's a manifesto for teachers and how we need to listen to young people in our care.
Yeah.
Another poem, Joe?
Okay. One from the Minotaur. I've got a lot of sympathy for the Minotaur. You know, the fact that he's born of a queen and the result of a god, shall we say. And he's made monstrous, you know, he has very little agency. So I wanted to highlight his story. This is called The Minotaur's Story, Birth. I am born into secrecy, born to screams and gasps, carved into my mother's shaking arms. For years I played alone, ate alone, nursed by the nurses who dared to brave the sight of me. My mother was a ghost, creeping at the edges of open doors, spying from the few windows that faced mine. My father was a myth, a sound, a word, a king. He visited me once, held me in his arms and slapped me when the point of my horns grazed the whiskers of his chin. From him, I learnt the word monster.
It's very that's also such a powerful illustration. In fact, all of the illustrations of the Minotaur evoke the empathy that your writing does, and there's a real rehabilitation of him to some extent in this story. But I think we have to talk a little bit about the women and the role that they play, and Ariadne, obviously, as his sister. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in my version at least, Ariadne, you know, she cares deeply for her brother, sees that he's been hard done by and is a very moral individual, yeah, and wants Theseus to go into the maze to help him, to get him out, I really wanted the Minotaur to have an ally on the outside, and Ariadne is that ally who, you know, felt like he should never have been put in the maze in the first place. So yeah, she's on his side.
As she says at one point, I think, how could you do anything else if all you're given is live food and you're stuck in a maze, and what else could you do except become this thing? So yes, definitely. I know I'm moving you on quickly through poems, Joe, but I would like to hear Bronze Words.
Bronze Words, okay. So this is at the point where Theo knocks on the door of who he believes is his father. Bronze Words. Words are heavy in his square jaw, barely able to hold their bronze. He swipes lazily with the questions clattering behind his teeth. What? Who are you? I'm undeterred. 7 years change a face. He squints through his one good eye, the barbershop mirror wink gone. It's me, I say. Theo, your son. With his weight on his good leg, he eyes me up, prepares a volley of swipes and swings. Didn't your mum tell you? I thought your mum would have told you. Didn't your mum say? I thought your mum would have said. Can't believe she didn't say. Thought you would have known. I duck, dive and weave through the blows. His words skim my skin. He watches each syllable failing to land, leans back, grunts in a bellow of air, mentally tests the weight of his metallic words and upswings with all his might. I'm not your dad.
Oh, what a moment that is. So if anybody who's read the book will realise that there's a sort of patterning going on between the labour that Theseus has just gone through and then what happens to Theo afterwards. It follows each time. Can you tell us a little bit about the poem that you've just read and how that relates to what came before it?
Yeah, so that is really Theo's kind of first challenge, first labour. Previously, we've seen Theseus head out onto the road with his sword and his sandals, and he first meets Periphetes, who is described variously as a cyclops, as a guy who batters travellers on the road with this massive bronze club. And Theseus manages to defeat him by questioning whether his club is actually bronze, and Periphetes, being a bit dim, said, yeah, look, have a look at it. Of course it's bronze, like, have a look. And as soon as Theseus has hold of it, he kills Periphetes. What I thought was quite interesting about that is the area that Theseus is in when he meets Periphetes is a place that's kind of historically known for healing. So I did wonder whether Periphetes maybe needed help, maybe had issues of his own, maybe just needed some support and was acting out and behaving in a way that he felt was right for a quote unquote man. So that's just happened in Theseus's story, and then Theo's version of Periphetes is meeting the man he believes to be his father, who is not quite a cyclops but has one eye better than the other and isn't quite lame in one leg but certainly has a limp.
And then there's also, the metallic reflects the bronze, that there are all these verbal connections as well as we go through the poems. And Theseus carries quite a lot of guilt with him over this killing, doesn't he? Yeah,
I was like Theo, very much shocked at the fact that the 6 labours of Theseus are it's very short. It's basically him meeting these various monsters and bandits and murderers and then just killing them. There's no discussion. There's no real depth to the characters. It just goes and kills them. So I wanted to start off the 6 labours with an actual murder and then explore the real impact of violence, of physical violence, because I think it's often glossed over in computer games and films and TV. We've seen countless murders on films and TV and think nothing of it. But the actual act, of course, is horrendous and would impact anyone deeply. And so I wanted to try and unpick what would really happen if a young teenage boy, which Theseus was, went out onto the road thinking he needs to go and kill all these people. How would he really react?
And we do find out a little bit more about these opponents that he has. I can't remember, is it Scion that pushes people into what they wash his feet and he pushes them into the sea and kills them. They're actually carrying out an act of kindness and basically kills them. But you get inside his head and you offer us some questions at least as to why he might be doing that. Yeah,
so I sort of posed him as a soldier, as an ex-soldier of war. I think it's interesting how, and shocking how often those we see on the streets are, often ex-military, and how people will serve and then get forgotten. And I think that's something which has probably always happened throughout time and is a terrible thing. And I thought he is probably someone with a past, with a dark past, and someone who's dealing with his own monsters, and the way he's dealing with it has just become really skewed. And he asks people, he's begging on the streets, asking them to wash his feet, and the passers-by wash his feet, and then as they wash his feet, he kicks them into the sea, where there is a giant turtle that feeds upon them. but that in the original myth, that's all we get. So I try to give him a bit more of a backstory.
I think because I cannot believe how quickly this time is going, and we do have to hear from Kate too. So I am going to move on and ask if we could hear the next poem.
Yeah. So this is Not All Monsters. This is the Creminian Sow originally in the Theseus story, and this is my version of the Theseus encounter with that so-called monster. Not all monsters. The villagers spoke of a beast of flaring snout and squealing roar, a pig-like monstrous thing that nightly skulked from door to door. It was said to have eaten neighbours as they slept in their beds at night. It was known to maul any man with its vicious tusky bite. Its body was all muscle, wrapped in scale and spine. Its movements were too sinuous for a beast considered swine. Its body far too long for a creature on 4 legs, but none could deny the piggish eyes that rolled inside its head, or the nose that was most pig-like, but with a reptilian tone, its blood-snot nostrils that could smell the fear in a grown man's moan. Its father was a serpent, its mother part woman, part snake, a monster born of monsters that roamed when the world first quaked. Theseus comforted the mourning, the bereaved and the wounded dying. He declared with an heroic air that he would do the purifying of ridding Crominion of the beast that stalked its land, how he would skin the pig-like thing and how its hide would be tanned. He ran into the forest with sword and club held heroically high. He followed the ruts of the rutted ground, hunting for the beast's monstrous sty. The trail led him to a hut, the ground around all beastly tramped, and there within by a fire's roar, an old woman sat hunched and cramped. I am Theia, said the woman. I am the beast that you seek. And Theseus saw from the open door her cloven hooves transformed to feet. I am the monster that eats the village. I am the sow that slithers in the gloom, and if you come any closer, it will be to meet your doom. I do not fear you, said Theseus, stepping into her lair. I have come to kill you, monster, to rid the village of your snare. Theia gave out a cackle that had the intended effect. What do you really know about the people you claim to protect? The people of that village have done unthinkable things, and if it wasn't for my stalking, their terror would infect everything. There were others here before them that they slaughtered without a care. There's a trail of death behind them to which no war could compare. I have trapped them as they've traveled, sowing misery and blood, and I have taken those I can. I have stemmed their murderous flood. Now you have come to kill me, to prove yourself a man, but not all monsters have claws, and not only men protect the land.
So the hero is as much a victim as the monsters in this story. They're both held captive by the roles that they're expected to perform.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was a lot of fun exploring that and exploring how societies can be villainous as well. I quite had a lot of fun of reinventing the Creminian Sow, who is also known as Theia at times, or maybe Theia was a lady who owned the Creminian Sow, because there's lots of different versions of the myth. But the Creminian Sow in some versions is born of monsters, one that's half woman, half snake, and another which is this huge giant serpent that came about right at the beginning of time. So I feel like something so elemental and epic and ancient is probably a bit more complex than simply being a monstrous pig that kills people.
I'm going to ask you to read the final poem that you chose for us this evening, which is Leia. But before you do that, could you just lead us in to explain a little bit about what happens before we get to that poem?
Yeah, so Leia is Theo's encounter with his version of the Creminian. So Theo's been looking for his father. He's had a few twists and turns, a few dead ends, shall we say, but eventually gets given an address where he thinks his father lives. But when he gets there, he doesn't meet his father. He meets a lady who has moved into the house, and his father has in fact recently moved, and he's just missed him. At this point in the book, this is the only point in the book where there is prose. I decided to write this section in prose because it felt like the space was different, that something else was happening, that in meeting the Crominian, so his version, he was actually entering into the space between dimensions, shall we say. So this is Leia. I follow her bulk through the gloom, squeezing behind the ever-growing piles of junk. A pram atop a washing machine in the hallway, a stack of nursing magazines balanced on a tower of buckets, boxes for bandages, a playpen holding bundles of adult-sized nappies. The front door is lost to me. The shadows start to sink. I narrowly miss her, turning off through a narrow gap between two broken flat-pack shelf units, holding jars of brown, bubbling liquids. We are in what must have been the front room. She points at a sofa covered in cat hair and dolls. I clear a space and sit, start to apologize, start to explain why I'm here, that I was expecting my father, but already she is shuffling away from me again in a thin, green-stained dress that clings like a second skin against her mass. She is back moments later with a letter, my handwriting, but the paper looks far older than it should for something sent weeks ago. You got the letter. You know why I'm here. She smiles and her canines overlap her scaled lips. I know many things. Does my father live here? Where is he? No, he doesn't live here. I apologize for wasting her time. I get up to leave, believing Moth found the wrong address. He doesn't live here anymore, dear, but this was his house. Tea? I sit back down as cat hair and dust tickle my throat. She walks away again, disappears behind a mound of cages stuffed with baby clothes, leaving me in the dank of the room. The light is stained. It's hard to make out where the windows are. Behind that pile of twitching bags, hidden by that tower of mannequin legs. A statue sits on a stone. A coffee table? A woman with legs splayed, scaled and clawed, wrapped by a serpent, its mouth writhing, its eyes blood-red jewels. Staring at them makes the beat of blood in my ears become a river. She trots slivers in, holding a tea tray pinched in meaty claws. She lays out the filthy pot and tea-stained mugs. You're my cup of tea. Tea makes me pee. She smiles her needle teeth as she pours, the tea boiling from the spout. You search for your father, but you found me again. I don't know you. Oh, dearie, you did or you will. The room darkens around us. The steam from the tea filling the air, the white glint of her eyes becoming brighter, the thin material of her caked dress swimming over her body. Who are you? What are you? Where's my dad? I scream at the thing shifting and slivering in front of me as the saggy face and jowls extend from the neck longer and longer, her dress now scaled skin, bristling and plaited, her face both pig and lizard, her body in front, her body behind, above, below, grunting and hissing. You searched, but it's brought you back to me, a nightmare forgotten, a dream not yet lived, another turn of the spiral, another twist, another offshoot of the maze. Did you kill me or believe me? Did you hear me or murder me? Doesn't matter, you did both, and I react to all reactions here where they meet, needing revenge, wanting to reward, having to terrify and inform. I'm sorry. I just came for my father. I scream into the darkness, standing to run, but every twist and turn is blocked by thick serpentine coils. Her voice circling me. You came for your father, but you found me. Tooth and claw, snout and venom. You searched for a father, but forgot a mother. You journeyed for masculinity, failing to see the manhood in womanhood, thinking you are one thing, disregarding what makes you whole, has brought you to me, savior and monster, pig and lizard, reality and myth. Her face snaps down out of the darkness, human eyes rolling above a piggish snout, framing an unhinged jaw that slavers and yawns my way. I duck and tumble, scatter and run, push past a tower of books, trip over a leaning filing cabinet, scatter a column of CDs. Dim stained light pulses up ahead. I head for it, skirting a mountain of clothing and tumbling out through the front door. The return to reality, spinning my head as much as my stomach with its over brightness. From the door behind me, I see her. A fleshy smile hangs on her now all too human face as she slowly closes the door. Immediately it is opened again by a very ordinary looking woman. Can I help you? She stutters. The hallway is bright white behind her, clear of mess, 2 children clinging to her legs. I wipe my eyes and stand on shaking legs. I tell her why I'm here. Oh, you should speak to the lawyer. He sold the house to us for your dad. Let me get you his card. Are you sure you're okay? I mutter a thanks as I take a new clue in my hand, grab my bike and cycle away as fast as I can.
You really had me in that poem. I thought I was going one way and then I went somewhere else entirely. And I could really see that as a visual. I could see that working on TV. The boy comes to the door, sees this nightmarish vision, and then the door opens again. You know, I could see all of that happening. You talked there about the sort of not seeing the manhood in womanhood. Say a little bit more about that and how that relates to the overall themes of the book.
I think the theme of toxic masculinity runs throughout, and I think what often gets missed when people force that idea of being a man and being masculine is the utter strength in femininity and in womanhood. And that's something I'm very aware of, being brought up by women, and I wanted to show Theo that he does have strength, and he doesn't need to search for this kind of invented idea of masculine strength. There is human strength, and there is strength in all of us. So I wanted to just try and challenge that silly notion, I think, of when we start to separate ourselves out and assume that to be strong is to be a man, and to be a man is to be violent and gruff and
Is it also connected to what I thought is another theme that comes through? It's a version, if you like, of the pen is mightier than the sword. And there's a point where Theo learns to take control of his words. And it says the words I spewed were not shouted. They were too weighty for hurling. My words were sharp and precise, whispered and deadly, feminine and masculine, and my own. And so that idea of feminine and masculine somehow comes together in the writing aspect as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun playing with that, and of course, being a poet and a writer, believe in the power of words, and and right from the beginning wanted to thread that through, hence the sort of metallic words poem of earlier, and to give especially young people reading it, to just let them see the strength and the power of their words and their voice, and how that will always win over physical brutality and physical strength and violence, and how our minds are the strongest thing that we have. And I really wanted Theo to learn that lesson, and Theseus to learn the lesson that running around and battling things, but it's a shame, isn't it? Because it's the world we live in. We're here in 2022 and we're still fighting wars and we're still killing one another, and yet we know deep down inside that's not the way forward, and that real strength comes from listening, from understanding, from tolerating and finding empathy. And I really hope that readers come away with that notion.
Just to say to anybody that hasn't got a copy of the book yet, I'm sure you will be getting one, that when you reach that prose that you've just read to us, this is something that when you see it on the page is different again, because it strikes you as being so different to what has come before, just in terms of its layout. And I wondered whether, Theo says that he likes free verse. He likes freedom. He likes his writing to be free, not constrained or trapped. How much is that you? That's not you.
No, I definitely, I like form. I do like form. Obviously I write in free verse and form, but I feel that there's something wonderful about the challenge of structure and form, that sort of creative restrictions, and how it always opens up something new, something surprising. I say to any poets that I'm kind of working with in workshop scenarios, if you get stuck, do a form poem, because you will always be surprised, because you suddenly have to start thinking of new ways around things. So like this morning I was doing the BBC live lesson, and I had to write an acrostic poem from the kids' suggestions live, and we did about 4 rehearsals, and each time I was doing a new acrostic poem, but always coming up with things that I wouldn't have come up with if I was just doing a free verse poem, because I had to use the word nature and use the first letter of the word for each line. So yeah, I think structure is great. I love free verse as well, but I think these are all just tools that we can use as and when, and that we don't need to be married to one in particular.
I think we should have a look at Kate's amazing illustration for the book as well. So I wonder if we can just put a spotlight on Kate, Will, and ask her to share the screen with us. And can we just welcome you?
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Kate. So I know Joe is a great admirer of your work. And of course, you did illustrate The Girl Who Became a Tree. Quite different, the treatment of the 2 books. And I wondered what was in your thought process when you approached this new project.
Well, I kind of, there's the interlocking stories of Theseus and Theo and the Minotaur, and I wanted to have a kind of slightly different visual language for each one of those. It's quite a big book. It's bigger than the Girl and the Tree, and so I thought it would benefit from just having some visual variety. You've only got black and white, so that was part of my thinking. And although it's probably not that obvious, the difference between the Theseus and the Theo images, they are done in slightly different ways. The Theseus ones, they've got quite a restricted tonal palette, more like a superhero comic. That was the kind of idea I had in my head. And with the Minotaur, for me, that story, I think it's wonderful the way that particular narrative is in the book, because his monstrousness is something that's put on him from the outside, and there's a sense of him being hidden away. So for me, that was the sort of darkness encroaching, and he was always being taken into the dark. So I could use quite a lot of blackness in that, and then I was thinking early on, so particularly I'm thinking of the Theseus's, the labours, and as Joe was describing early on, those some of them are just appallingly violent and just awful, and particularly that well, they're all, but the the Sinis one, where the victims are being tied between sort of saplings, and as soon, I mean, I was thinking, I was thinking to myself, well, you cannot depict that realistically. It's just impossible. So that was the idea behind those little sort of chapter headings, where I've sort of taken a reference from sort of Greek pottery, painted Greek pottery, but pre-classical. So it's not the kind of Greek imagery that we're all used to. It's stuff that was a couple of 100 years before that, and it's very diagrammatic, and there's no sense of these as individual people. So it becomes easier to kind of depict these dreadful things that are happening, the people being thrown into the mouth of the giant turtle when they're all of those kinds of things. I can show those in this very small form, in this very black and white and kind of unemotional diagrammatic way of making images. And I think also for me that using that reference of so I've got some images that are quite modern, realistic, up-to-date images, and I've got some that refer back to a very archaic way of depicting people and showing what's happened, what's happening between them. Yeah, that was the way of talking about. Well, that's the Theseus. I actually have a 19-year-old son myself, and I was talking to him about these images, and it's that thing of becoming a kind of 16 or 17-year-old boy, and I think particularly in Theseus he's kind of depicted as being very strong, and that you stop being a kind of cute kid that everybody likes and is interested in. You've become something that people are slightly scared of and slightly uncomfortable with, and of course, you know, teenage boys are often very uncomfortable with their own bodies and their own strength, and so it was the idea with Theseus of him being like a superhero, with all that implies, because it is that thing, as Joe was reading, I think the first poem you read, where he kills him. It's this sort of, to begin with, this sense of kind of brute violence, solving all the problems, just coming in and cutting off a head or whatever. And then he does start to suffer the effects of being the perpetrator of so much violence. And so I wanted to sort of show that identity as a superhero kind of breaking down, and he loses the covering of his eyes, and you start to see his whole face, and you start to see his hair, and he becomes less of an icon and more of a human being.
It's interesting because although we don't have time to talk about it too much, and I would love to talk to you for even longer, is that with Ariadne, she doesn't have that covering, but she still has that connection with, I think she has an eye on the front of her, whereas he's got the spiral. That
image. Of course, I'm just thinking, you know, how do boys see what identities they might take on and as they grow up? So it was simply kind of looking at toys and that kind of role models they're offered in that kind of world. I mean, yeah, and yes, that was the idea behind that how much is it about violence? And then you've got the little Lego man, which is sort of much more approachable, I guess, although rather blank.
Yes. So I think this is, as you've said, he doesn't look overly impressed with himself.
Yeah, I think for me this was the point at which he's starting to feel not very comfortable with this, with his heroic status, with his great sort of physical prowess that's causing all this mayhem, even though he obviously is solving problems for the people around him. But so he's lost that covering over his eyes, and he's thinking, I think the poem says he can hear the screams in his sleep of what's happened to this sort of monster, as you say, which in a way perhaps isn't that monstrous. Yeah,
this is what you were talking about, the chapter
Yeah.
headings. This is the awful labour where the innkeeper ties them to the bed, and
yes,
then if they're not the right height, chops off their feet.
yeah. So you could never show that in realistically, the kind of fear on the face of somebody this is about to happen to and the horror of it. So it's this kind of images I'm hoping kind of suggests without being too, because they're impersonal in that kind of visual language from those those Greek times. It's not about individuality or emotion, really.
And there's also a sense in which Jo's poetry has done that. I mean, that the poetry is very graphic at that point, particularly the one you were talking about with the pine trees, and then being unzipped, like a Shakespearean cut them down the middle. So it doesn't need that, does it, either? Because the language is creating those images for us.
Yeah.
Oh, and then finally, I wanted you to tell us about this one.
Oh, well, Theo has gone into the home of his real father, and his new wife is there, and of course she's not entirely pleased to see him. So it was a way for me of kind of making links between the different parts of the story. So the fact that she has a tattoo on her arm, which is also a tattoo that's on some of the other female characters in Theseus's world. So it was ways of making connections between those characters, and that she is a sort of perhaps a modern embodiment of Theseus's father's wife, who's rather witch-like and frightening. But I also got the little boy has got a kind of toy bull that so it's become a kind of soft toy. And I mean, the bull is such a wonderful visual thing to use. It's like, it's such a rich thing from the past, from the Bronze Age, but also it's Picasso, and it's an absolute gift to an illustrator, really.
So all too brief, Kate, but maybe we get the chance to talk again at another time. Just for our audience, we're coming up to the close of our event, but I do want to give you the opportunity to ask some questions. So just while you're thinking of any questions that you might want to pose in the chat, and we might be able to take a couple of those, I just invite you to think about, if you've enjoyed what you've heard today, that you might, and you don't already have one, you might want to go and pick up a copy of The Boy Lost in the Maze. And if you wanted to support us, then you could get that from bestbooksforschools.com or an independent bookseller, or get a copy from your library. If you do get it from us today, then it's a special £10 and no postage cost. And it's pretty easy to remember, bestbooksforschools.com. And guess what? It's not only for schools. So, do consider that. But please do put your questions into the chat. And as I say, if there are some, we'll take a couple. And then I know Jo is going to give us a final reading as well. So let's have a look. Have you spotted any questions in the chat, Jo? Here we are. My goodness me, I bet there's so many. I'm going to take the one that I can see. Can you see any that you wanted to particularly answer, Jo? If not, I've got one here from Kelly Marshall, who wanted to ask actually about a different collection, Poems Aloud. How did you get the idea to write that particular book?
Well, with Poems Aloud, I'd been working a lot in schools and seeing that it really had an impact getting kids to stand up and put poems on their feet. And had some techniques that got them using sort of, like kind of theatre games and stuff, but to perform poems, and wanted to just crystallize that in a book in a really simple way. So there's just little suggestions at the head of each page to get kids easily putting a poem on its feet by using very simple techniques like diminuendo and crescendo, and using different emotions in the voice. So each poem will focus on a different area, but it was a great deal of fun to write, actually.
When you write something like, let me just make a connection between that and The Boy Lost in the Maze. In writing this, do you envisage or think about that being read aloud as well? Or is this just a private, quiet read?
I think the performance poet in me is always thinking about the stage. And when I write, I do tend to pace and read things out loud. But some poems work better on the page than they do on the stage, and vice versa. So I definitely wanted this to work on the page, first, and then to find those moments where, you know, those rare wonders where you get a poem that can do both.
If you don't mind, we're a little bit over, but can we ask you 2 more questions? I know you need to get some rest because you've got a busy day ahead of you tomorrow, but maybe just briefly, Chris Fraser wants to know, what's your best editing tip when you're writing poems with children or in school?
To underline anything that they like for whatever reason. It could be a word, it could be an idea, it could be a phrase. And then to pull out those things and then to start writing again from those pulled out moments. I find that can be really good, because it takes away the fear of what they've written having to be good from the offset, because you're treating it almost like a Lego set. You know, you're kind of pulling bricks out. Okay, let's see what we can make from these few bricks that we've pulled out of this pile. So I think that's quite a good technique.
I'm going to be trying that one. And then last question then, from Sophie Anderson, will there be another in this series? Tree Maze, any clues you can have or not?
Nothing that's come to mind as of yet. But you know, you never know. Watch this space.
Yeah, quite hard writing and being Children's Laureate for 2 years to write something so intense. I would just say it's quite a month for Joe as well. He's got a couple of other books out that you might want to have a look at. I'm sure Janetta doesn't mind me mentioning that there's Creeping Beauty out there and Blow a Kiss.
Catch a Kiss. Which is for little ones, very little ones.
To see us out this evening, it's always nice to end with a reading. What we're going to do, Joe's going to read one final poem. If there's anything that you want to say to him, add in the comments. I'll send him the chat afterwards. So do be thinking about that. But we're going to turn cameras off after this reading. So before we do that, Joseph Coelho, can I just thank you so much for being an amazing Children's Laureate, an amazing poet, and thank you for spending the evening with us today. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Janetta. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you to everybody for coming along this evening and for watching the live stream. I'm going to say good night, turn my camera off, and just listen to Joe.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's come out tonight. Thank you. Theseus, Theo, and the Minotaur in the dark place. Being here feels like being in the eye of a storm. The beast looks up at me, something human in his eyes. Your sister sent me, I say. I'm here to get you out. I show him the thread. He reaches out a thick hand, and suddenly we're both risking it all, both trying not to be the hero or the monster, each searching to be a different kind of man. He shifts, he changes. Through him, I start to see another. I see a boy, maybe my age. He is looking at me through the Minotaur, and for a moment, they are one. The boy and him, horned and scared, eyes like mine. I reach forward, needing to connect. Feeling the thread vibrating in my hands, I stretch. He reaches and we are connected. Everything is still at the center of the labyrinth. Time has stopped in this dark place as we stand here where dimensions kiss. We tell each other of the strengths of our mothers, of the power hidden in words and riddles. We share the vulnerability we feel in love and the pain hidden in force and brutality. We talk of our fathers, men flawed and scared, broken and trying. We tell each other it's okay to be scared. It feels great to cry. And that when we search for anything, we'll always find ourselves. Thank you.
Joe, thank you so much. What a lovely, positive, affirming and important message to end on. So good night to everybody else. Joe, get some good rest. Enjoy your event tomorrow. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.